Welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast, where I, Genevieve Faulkner, share what I'm becoming aware of. Becoming Aware podcast, my name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host, and if you are watching this on YouTube, hi. So another week has gone by and Epstein is still very much the topic of conversation a lot online. I'm not quite sure how much is actually being done to create some sort of change beyond everybody talking about it. But I do think it's important for people to talk about. So I want to continue the conversation that I was having last week, because I think that, you can look at this from two different points of view. One, we're being flooded with information to kind of like overwhelm our systems so that they can kind of control us even more than perhaps what they have. Or this has been brought up to the surface because now we actually have the ability to be present with this in a way and contribute to creating some sort of change with it. So I would like to hope that enough of us are willing to do what it takes to create the change. And it is easy to look at this from the place of feeling like it's something that is way too big to be able to influence it all. And yet we all have power. We all have our personal power. And I mentioned last week the way in which patterns kind of contribute to the creation of what it is that we experience on this planet is it's massive. When we individually go within and look at what it is that we're holding on to, the belief systems, the suppressed emotional energy, the trauma, and allow ourselves to release it, it begins to create a hole in the fabric of reality. I see each of us as being like these little threads, and when we pull on the thread, it creates this hole and that breaks the whole fabric apart, right? And the reality that we're all in right now is not one that I think really is serving us, en masse. There is a lot of people that are suppressing who they really are. They're not allowing themselves to have the joy and the adventure and the fun that is possible because they've been entrained into this system that is, for the average person, it's like slavery. So I wanted to kind of share a little bit. It's really hot here, by the way. So if I start sweating and, look really gross, I'm sorry. It's so hot today. I wanted to talk a little bit about my healing journey a little more, because I'm hoping that people will get a little bit more awareness about the things that they can look at within to create some sort of shifting and changing. One of the people that I really like to listen to is the director of The Vow, Mark Vicente. He has this ability to look at the shadow of humanity and kind of dissect the psychology of it in a way that's kind of, that creates relaxation for my nervous system, weirdly. When you're somebody that functions from awareness, when you perceive the things that other people don't want to acknowledge or see, that can create kind of this anxiety or stress because, it's being denied. When people are willing to actually be present with it and address it and dissect it, it's kind of okay, we can be present with this now. We can acknowledge this. And it's only in the being present with something that we have the ability to change things, right? If you're avoiding it, if you're denying it, if you're disconnecting from it or just disassociating from it, you don't have the ability to create change. And so I was listening to him the other week, and I mentioned last week how I could kind of see how all of this ties into this deep misogyny, but he was looking at it from the place of this, these people with the things that they've been doing to children and babies, it really being about them wanting to be greater than God, doing things to really kind of take a dump on the power of God, right? Whatever that God, whatever that power is. So I can really see that. I can see how some of these people might function that way. I can see that for people that have out-created the system, meaning, you know, have created a lot of money, they no longer function perhaps in the same way as the rest of us. So I think that there can be this danger sometimes of, you know, when you can get everything so fast, you can get into this cycle of needing more and more and more and more and more, you know, pushing the edge of things in order to get a high, right? And I think that a lot of people that are part of this, I think some of them function that way. That said, there's all sorts of other psychologies or pathologies within like that system as well. And the thing is as I said, like you can look at it and be like, you know, I've got no power here. This doesn't really connect to me. And yet, like the work that I've done with people, helping people shift the subconscious beliefs within their system and, you know, ending the patterns that have created the way of functioning in their life that hasn't worked for them. Like, I don't think I've come across a person that hasn't had some sort of abuse trauma that they've taken on through the ancestral lines, right? We've all got this. So we're seeing what is like behind the curtain, like within reality right now. But that's also something that we need to be willing to look at within our own little worlds, because when you start to look at it in your own little world, that's where the shift can occur. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey with regards to some of what I think needs to be shifted more in a lot of people. And, you know, my healing journey is one that is always continuing. So it's not like I'm, you know, reached some sort of place where I'm holier than thou. But I want to go back to 2011 because that's where I discovered theta healing. So that was a big year for me. I was a flight attendant in the Middle East before then, and I was traveling all over the world, and I went backpacking, discovered theta healing. I got married then. My husband lived in England, so I had to move to England to live with him. And that was a choice that was a leap of faith. Because we hadn't lived together before. We'd just done this long distance back and forth, me always traveling to the UK on flights and seeing him then. And so it was a lot of change. It was a brand new beginning, new start, and marriages are challenging. You know, there's times where they're challenging, particularly in the beginning for a lot of people. For us, having me, you know, from this other country, not knowing anyone, setting up a new business, living with him for the first time, there were challenges. There were other challenges within his family system as well, which affected us a lot. And so all of that motivated me to really look at the patterns that I was holding on to within, because I wanted to create, you know, the greatest possible relationship I could have with him through really working on my stuff. And I wanted to be the greatest healer I could be. And when you're doing any kind of like subconscious work with someone, if you've got blind spots, if you've got belief systems or unresolved issues in the area that you're working on, it's kind of like everything gets filtered through that. And so there can be this tainting. And I didn't like that. I wanted to be like clear enough to be able to set people free of the patterns that they were holding on to. And the other reason that I was obsessively working on myself so much was that the second that I met my husband, or ex-husband now, you know, my firstborn was in my head. You know, they were talking to me, and they were letting me know that they were coming, and they were letting me know that I needed to get ready. And I think that there was an agreement between both of us where I desired to be something greater than what I had in childhood, and that's what she desired also. Like, she's a little Virgo. She's, you know, she knows how to be boss. So there was this kind of like push energy at me to really work on my stuff. So one of the things that in that time I really looked at was this anger at God. And I had a lot of it. There was anger, there was resentment, there was hatred, there was this need to rebel against God. And in theta healing, one of the things that we do is we go on this kind of journey of questioning the person that's having the session to get to the bottom belief system, to be able to bring in new energy and downloads to shift and change things. And for me, all of that was connecting to my grandfather. So I was carrying a lot of stuff for him. Now, at that time, I had this adoration of him. He was this, Italian migrant or descendant of Italian migrants, and, was very charismatic and charming, had this big family. When I was little, we'd have family gatherings with like so many people at the table, and he'd be at the head of the table and, making lots of jokes, and everybody would be laughing. So I had this kind of like looking up to him, but looking back, I can see how we function very much in that paradigm of like the kind of like the cult of patriarchy, right? So I really kind of, idolized him. So I was very kind of grateful at the time to be able to connect to his being. And when you're doing theta healing work, when you're going into that theta brainwave, you actually have this ability to access different times and spaces, and you can remember the things that your ancestors experienced through like the cells that you're carrying. Like we store that information within ourselves. And so I would have all of these visions and experience, like memories of kind of what he experienced growing up. And he went through like the difficulty of being molested, or something happening with a priest at his school growing up. And when he reported it, he wasn't believed. And his mother was a devoted Catholic and decided to side with the school. And I think he was kicked out of the school. So he was kind of like made to be the bad one. And so there was this kind of like disconnect between him and his mum. And there was this disconnect between him and God. There was this real anger at God. And there's this need to rebel, because if a priest can do that, like there goes the whole system, right? And so I can remember at the time I was doing a lot of healing work with his being and my own energy, because I'd been carrying all of this for him. So I was releasing it from my cells. I was witnessing his journey and giving him the acknowledgement of what it is that he went through from a different space. And I would like to hope that I contributed, change for him. What I didn't see at that time, because of the way I was transitioning from, which was this kind of adoration, this love for him, but from this place of a pedestal, I didn't kind of acknowledge the aftermath of what he created because of the experiences that he had. So he was in intelligence in World War II, because he spoke Italian. And after World War II, he got married and he had a family, had my mother, 6 other kids after that. But he had this, I don't know, he had all sorts of secrets. And so sorry, I've lost track. So jumping forward to 2022, my mum is actually in this little craft shop a couple of towns away, having a nice time with one of her sisters. And she runs into this woman who's down from Queensland for the weekend, who grew up in Geelong, and they start talking. And halfway through the conversation, they realize that, to their horror, that they are speaking about the same man being their father. And this wasn't the first time this had happened. I think that my grandfather had a couple of secret families, and it can be easy to kind of go, well, those were the times, that's what men did. But I can see where, on one hand, there was this element of him having this abuse in childhood that was unresolved and unhealed. And when that occurs, there can be these coping mechanisms of kind of being hypersexual, but also we can sometimes merge with our abuser and take on the energy and then act things out because of what we've experienced. So there was an element of that happening. And then this kind of like need for excitement based upon, you know, the previous job that he'd done, where he'd been, you know, taking on all sorts of tasks for the army. It created this kind of way of functioning where he had to, he needed the secrecy, he needed like the excitement and whatnot, and he needed perhaps the fix of being with other women, because I think that perhaps he in his psychology, that was the way he felt nurtured and cared for because of the disconnect with his mother. And so that was like the timing of that kind of coming up was interesting, because that kind of coincided with me leaving Access Consciousness and kind of having to look at the places and spaces where I hadn't seen or I'd ignored or disconnected from certain elements of things that were going on because of this patterning and programming within my DNA around not addressing the issue, right? Not avoiding like what was going on. My grandmother probably knew the things that my grandfather was doing, but I don't think she felt like she had any power in those times to be able to create change. Not with, she lost one of her kids, but not with 6 kids, right? There wasn't an ability for her to possibly leave him. And so she had the coping mechanism of just kind of getting on with things and pretending that everything was fine, and, you know, we'll just not really acknowledge it. That kind of coping mechanism eats you up inside. So she developed cancer of the esophagus, partially because I think she couldn't digest the experience that she was having, and partially because I don't think that she had the ability to speak her truth. I don't think that she was given that space. And she got very angry and resentful. She was a beautiful woman. But she was an angry woman, and it hardened her. And times are different now. Times are very different now. But I think because times are different now, we have to acknowledge what we have the ability to acknowledge and change things the way that we have the ability to change things. So the reason why I'm telling that story is because we all have these learned behaviors and belief systems and whatnot within our subconscious that causes us to behave a certain way. And with the way in which the patriarchy has been structured for so long, it has served men in a way that has allowed men to function from this secrecy, not treat women as equal, behave badly and not have to face any consequences. And that doesn't work. That is, I believe, what, this whole Epstein thing is really about. It's about us demanding like that things change now. And it has been. I believe that there is this whole kind of like wave of women, particularly in my generation, that kind of like did the thing of getting married, but also, got jobs, were financially responsible for themselves. And because of the way in which men haven't had to change the way that women have, the system of marriage hasn't quite worked. And so I do think there's a lot of women my age that have in the divorced category that are kind of like working on healing themselves and changing these patterns. And I think, there's a lot online about, the male loneliness epidemic, which I believe is because the men haven't quite caught up and realized what they need to do in order to grow or heal or change, right? If you're not changing, you're basically decaying, you're dying, right? You're just keeping things stagnant. That's against nature. That's against the way in which the universe works. And so all of us, like whether or not we're, you know, men or women, we have to allow ourselves to change. We have to evolve. And so some of you, like some of you listening to this might be women that are in the category of not kind of being in the position of having done the work yet. And there might be elements that you've been denying about the way in which relationship functions that need to change. So what I wanted to kind of invite you guys to look at is look at the way in which women have functioned in your genetic line, and look at whether or not there's any coping mechanisms or ways of functioning that you've taken on that aren't actually allowing change to occur in this particular circumstances, that are enabling men to be irresponsible, to not take accountability, to not change, to not grow, to not heal. Okay. Now, the way in which the structure of patriarchy has been created, it's very much kind of like this narcissistic, codependent type dynamic where women, because they weren't considered equal, because they relied on men for safety and security, because they couldn't make their own money, that created a codependent type relationship with men. And it meant that they had to center men in a way that was narcissistic for the men, right? Men learned that they are, you know, entitled to like have the world kind of revolve around them in a way, right? And I'm talking about kind of like beneath the surface. So some of you might be like in resistance to what I'm saying right now. Like I'm speaking to the things that are subconsciously beneath the surface that we're not always acknowledging, right? You might not consciously believe that, but in the subconscious, we can have all sorts of different programs that are actually the opposite to what we consciously believe, right? And so this is what has to change. There has to be this element of breaking apart the codependent, narcissistic type dynamics and equalizing things out so that the men that are in this position of power are not the ones that just have no regard for women and children. So yeah, so look at the way in which women have coped. Is there disconnection? Is there disassociation? Is there denial? And if there is, and if you're doing any of that, what if you went beyond that now? What if you're willing to look at what it is that you don't want to deal with or handle in the face and actually looked at like, how does this change? What do I have to do here in order to change things? So speaking to the codependent element, part of what has created that is the place and space where women weren't able to create money for themselves. That's not the time anymore. And yet we can still have the programming within our systems that create us thinking that we need a man to be the source of something for us. And when we need the man to be the source of something for us, that's where we go into denial, we go into avoidance, we disconnect from what it is that we're not okay with that they're doing, because we don't feel like we've got the power to change it because we need them to financially take care of us, okay? And so some of you might want to look at what your relationship, if you're a woman, what is your relationship with money? And also if you are a man, because we have both within our all of the beliefs of our female ancestors, all of the beliefs of our male ancestors. And so look at the beliefs with money. Do you believe that you need a man for money? Do you believe that you need him for safety or security? And if so, what you can begin to do is start to look at ways in which you can be that security and safety for yourself. Learn to grow the muscles of creating money in different ways, or financially, or investing. Learn the ways in which you can develop your power so that you are not making the other sex more powerful than you. Men, Look at what's your relationship with women and money. Do you believe you have to provide for them? Is there something with regards to that that makes you feel powerful in a way that you don't want to give that up? Do you know your power if you're not having to play that role? Are you able to let a woman stand in her power and still be with her? Or is this need to be great? Is there a need to be greater than her because you're a man? So when you've got that need, true power does not take the power of another. Okay, women and men should be able to both be in their power at once, and that should be able to be something that contributes to both parties. But when there's this wounding that hasn't been addressed in men, what can happen, or women, but what can happen is the success and the power gets created from the ego, right? And so when the ego gets involved, there can be this resistance to allowing anybody else to have any power, because beneath the surface, beneath the illusion of the power that they feel like they have, is this wounded little boy that is unhealed and hurt and angry and in pain, and quite possibly wants to lash out at people because of the way they were treated. This is what needs to be addressed in order to create change. I think that the way in which the system has been created, there hasn't possibly been enough, in a weird way, space for men to be really vulnerable and actually be present with themselves in a way that actually gets them to the place where they can look at that part of them and be with that part of them and allow that energy to transmute. So being the strong one, being the provider, being the one that's, got to be always in that role, I think can create this disconnect from that. That said, sometimes there can be this element within relationships where perhaps that's at play and they are taking up that space, but there's that need for control and other insecurities that creates this avoidance of allowing change, because they're afraid that if they change, they might, lose what they have in a relationship. And so they can sabotage the change that way too. So I guess what I'm kind of inviting you all to look at is partially, the wounded inner children within men and women, because the relationships that you create, if you're not coming from a place of being with yourself and holding yourself and allowing everything that you need to heal and grow and change, to come up and shift and release, you will look to the other person to provide to you what it is that you haven't had, and that creates dependency. And that dependency creates a powerlessness that creates a toxic type bond that allows people to then do all sorts of things to one another because they are not dealing with the wounding. I feel like right now there is a mass call for everybody to deal with the wounding within. So there is also an element of, when I ask, look at whether or not there's any enabling happening in the world, in the relationships that you have. If there is, if there isn't that dependency and that need, sometimes in order to create change, you have to be willing to walk away. That's the only way in which you can be heard. That's the only way in which you can be taken seriously, right? Because when there's a toxic bond at play, it often goes round in circles, and it doesn't kind of, the person who's not changing and perhaps functioning from their wounds and doing power from their wounds may not take the other person seriously unless they leave. So this is really kind of I don't know. I feel like all of us that are willing to need to be looking at within, what is it that I need to actually shift and change here to contribute to creating something greater collectively for this planet, because there is such a divide between men and women right now. It's a little scary. And I think that there may be some agendas at play with all of that is coming out, and, you know, some of the political parties right now and whatnot, to create that divide. Because the more you can create division, the more power you have over individuals. And so it's only through the willingness of both men and women to not go into like this place of blame with one another, but actually go within and look at, okay, what is it that I'm holding on to? What's wounded within me? What am I carrying from my ancestors? What do I have the ability to transmute and change with all of that? And also, what is this other person willing to choose and change? Is there any action I can take to contribute to that? And as I said, sometimes it's leaving. Unless we're doing that, we're kind of playing into the reality of division and conflict and war that doesn't create a future that is greater for, you know, the generations beyond us. A healthy society should be focusing and contributing to the generations after us, right? If what we're dealing with is en masse having men in power that are using women and children like cattle, there is a sickness that we all need to deal with, right? There is something that needs to change here. So yeah, that's me on my high horse today. Yeah, so the only other thing I'll say, like, there's an element, I want to kind of invite you guys to look at, like, what is it like, and some of you may not even have looked at this stuff, and I get it, but what is it that, like, these files bring up for you, you know, like, and what is it that these men bring up for you? And is there, you know, does it bring up powerlessness? Does it bring up fear? Does it bring up, I don't know, like what does it bring up for you? Like, if you can be honest with yourself and present with yourself with regards to that, that is what begins to open this door into your subconscious that allows things to shift and change. Yeah, I'm going to talk more about, like, the female and male wounds on the next episode. So I think I'll leave it there for today. Just FYI, for those that are interested, one of the ways to create the change is theta healing. I do offer sessions. I do offer classes. You can check that out via my website. But there are also so many different ways that you can create change within, and that does contribute to creating something greater without. So, you know, within the collective. So yeah, just like, for those of you that are feeling powerless with regards to the situation, you are not powerless. You do have power. You do have the ability to influence some things. So ask yourself the question, what can I actually do here to create some sort of change? And if this was a mirror of things that are happening within both, like, you know, well, within my own world, is there an element of any of this that applies to me? And if there is, what do you need to shift and change and release or choose differently in order for that to end? Yeah, I hope this episode has contributed to you guys. I know it's an intense topic. Do remember, if you are watching stuff online, take time out, connect with the earth. The earth is always with us. It is one of the best healers out there. And yeah, if there is anything you guys want me to talk about, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to let them leave them below as well. Thanks, guys.